Why do we become so rigid in our moral convictions? Cuts to the very heart of the modern human condition. It's not merely a psychological inquiry, but a philosophical one, touching on our deepest needs for meaning, belonging, and order in a world that often feels chaotic and absurd. Let's move beyond the surface-level debates and explore the profound, often unsettling mechanisms that drive us toward moral fundamentalism. 1. The primacy of pain, the unseen engine of ideology. We like to believe our convictions are born of reason, but more often they're the intellectual scaffolding built around a wound. Radicalization, whether political, religious, or social, is rarely a purely intellectual journey. It is an emotional and existential one. The pain of feeling powerless, invisible, or betrayed by a world that promised justice creates a psychic vacuum. Into this void rush ideologies that offer not just answers, but existential relief. They provide a clear enemy, a target for the diffuse anger that comes from moral injury, a purified identity, a new, noble self-concept to replace a wounded one, a sacred cause, a purpose that feels larger than one's individual suffering. This is why the rhetoric of radical movements across the spectrum is so similar. It tells a simple, powerful story of good versus evil. It is a psychological balm for the unbearable ambiguity of modern life. 2. The metaphysics of certainty, when identity fuses with ideology. At its core, this process is a response to what philosophers call ontological insecurity, a profound uncertainty about one's place in the world and the very meaning of existence. When someone experiences a moral trauma, a deep violation of their sense of how the world should work, it can trigger identity collapse. The foundational trust in reality shatters. The fusion of personal identity with a moral cause is a powerful, albeit dangerous remedy. The statement, "I am my cause," transforms every challenge to the idea into a personal annihilation threat. This is not merely tribalism. It is a form of metaphysical self-defense. The radical isn't just defending an opinion. They are defending the very framework that holds their shattered world together. In this light, radicalism is not just hatred. It is often pathologized meaning-making, an attempt to heal a wound by making the entire world conform to the shape of one's pain. 3. The abdication of complexity, the seductive lure of the binary. The human mind craves narrative. Complexity is cognitively expensive and existentially unsettling. Moral fundamentalism offers a devastatingly simple solution. It replaces the messy spectrum of human reality with a clean binary logic. Good versus evil, oppressed versus oppressor, pure versus corrupt. This is where we see the shadow of Erich Fromm's profound insight in Escape from Freedom. He argued that the burden of individual freedom, the responsibility to choose, to doubt, to create our own meaning, is so heavy that many willingly surrender it to authoritarian systems or rigid ideologies. He wrote, "The need to escape freedom is the need to escape the burden of choice." Certainty, even a cruel and simplistic one, can feel safer than the terrifying responsibility of freedom and doubt. The radical chooses the prison of dogma over the vertigo of the unknown. 4. The digital cathedral, performing virtue in the new public square. Social media did not create these dynamics, but it engineered a perfect ecosystem for their exponential growth. These platforms function as digital cathedrals, where identity, belonging, and moral status are publicly performed and validated. This creates a dopaminergic feedback loop for virtue. A moral claim is made. It is rewarded with likes, shares, and affirming comments. Amens. This reinforcement is not for nuanced understanding, but for tribal loyalty and rhetorical force. The performer feels a sense of righteousness and belonging. The result is moral gentrification. The sincere, difficult work of justice is displaced by the performance of wokeness. The goal shifts from doing good to being seen as good by one's chosen tribe. This corrupts moral motivation at its source, turning ethics into a social currency. 5. A deeper library. Philosophical and psychological guides. To truly understand this, we must consult the thinkers who have mapped this treacherous terrain of the human soul. The psychological blueprint. Erich Fromm's The True Believer, the timeless analysis of how mass movements offer a substitute for individual worth, attracting those who are frustrated with their own meaningless lives. Jonathan Haidt's The Righteous Mind reveals how our morality binds and blinds, showing that our rational minds are often merely lawyers for our intuitive tribal commitments. Timothy Wilson's Strangers to Ourselves explores the adaptive unconscious, forcing us to confront the unsettling truth that we are often strangers to our own deepest motivations. The philosophical foundations. Erich Fromm's Escape from Freedom, a masterpiece on the psychic terror of freedom and our flight into the arms of authoritarianism and conformity. José Ortega y Gasset's The Revolt of the Masses diagnoses the rise of the mass man who, lacking introspection, imposes his crude, unexamined convictions on all of society. Charles Taylor's The Ethics of Authenticity traces how the modern ideal of being true to oneself can decay into a soft relativism and a culture of narcissism, hollowing out our shared moral foundations. Modern diagnoses. Pankaj Mishra's The Age of Anger connects global populist and extremist rage to the failed promises of modernity, the humiliation of those left behind by progress. Alan Jacobs' How to Think, a vital, humble manual on cultivating the intellectual and moral virtues necessary to resist the seductive call of the tribe. 6. The Socratic Intervention, Questions for the Self. True understanding begins not with diagnosing others, but with interrogating oneself. Ask quietly and with brutal honesty. Am I seeking the truth, or am I seeking reinforcements for my existing battalion? Do I listen to understand the human behind the opposing view, or merely to identify the weaknesses in their armor? Is my sense of virtue based on the private integrity of my actions, or the public recognition of my stance? Would I hold my beliefs as fiercely if they brought me social ostracism instead of social reward? And the most revealing question of all, where does my certainty end and my fear begin? 7. The deeper summary. The battle for the human spirit. What we call wokeness or radicalism is, at its best, a genuine and necessary awakening to moral reality. At its worst, it becomes a secular inquisition, a performance of purity that masks a deep spiritual emptiness. The underlying trauma is not of oppression alone, but of cosmic disorientation. We are creatures who crave a meaningful story, living in a universe that appears indifferent. The radical ideology provides a compelling, if destructive, story. We are all susceptible. The line between righteous conviction and self-righteous dogma is perilously thin. As Nietzsche warned, beware that when fighting monsters, you yourself do not become a monster. For when you gaze long into an abyss, the abyss also gazes into you. The ultimate challenge, then, is not to win the battle, but to preserve one's humanity within it. It is to heed the ancient, quieter wisdom of Aristotle, who taught that virtue is not found in the extremes, but in the difficult, nuanced, and lifelong pursuit of the golden mean.